Good morning, everybody. This is Kurt talking to you this morning from Maryland. I hope everyone is warm. Hope you have power, or that you're in a situation where you can handle whatever going on, weather-wise, cold-wise, and that everyone's healthy. So this morning I want to talk about an expression that's comes from Chinese, but it's also very popular in Korea. The expression is head of a dragon, tail of a snake. And in Korean it's pronounced Ryongdu Sami, which is literally just dragon head, snake tail. And so one reason why this comes to mind for me is that part of the expression means, and it's the meaning is actually rather obvious. It means something or someone who starts out very strong, but then doesn't follow through on the strong start. So that's the head of a dragon is the strong start. The tail of a snake is the not so strong follow through. And if you see pictures of East Asian dragons, they're often very serpentine. However, they have big head with claws and big head with fangs, and the body is often looks like a snake, but unlike a snake, the body has claws. But if the dragon has no claws, then it has the tail of a snake. And once you get past the head, if you're on the receiving end of the dragon, once you get past the head, you're okay, even though that's the hard part, getting past the head. Now, so in the Chinese zodiac, which assigns a different sign or animal to each year, there are 12 and they cycle around. And the year of the dragon, which we are still in, just barely in the lunar calendar, is always followed by the year of the snake. And so one of the reasons why this expression has special significance to Koreans is that 1592 was the year of the dragon. And that was the year that Korea was invaded by Japan. And at first, the invasion went extremely well for the Japanese, which meant it went extremely badly for the Koreans. But in the following year, so that was the year of the dragon, the head of the dragon. But in the following year, it began to seem that the invasion it had the head of a dragon, it had the tail of a snake. And so historically, this has resonance with the Korean people. And the story of the Japanese invasion is quite interesting. There were a lot of reasons for the Japanese victories at first, and the victories were quite overwhelming. And in fact, the Japanese expected that the Koreans would just submit once they'd been overwhelmed by this initial invasion. And one of the reasons why the Japanese invasion had the tail of a snake was because the Koreans did not submit. despite the terrible losses that they experienced, one of the things that the Japanese had not counted on was that the Koreans didn't give up. In fact, the Japanese had planned to just use Korea as a staging area for a much larger invasion. They they were planning on conquering all of Asia, and they just saw Korea as a convenient place to start. So one of the ways in which the refusal of the Korean people to submit, to just give up, one of the ways in which they refused to give up was that even though the Korean army had been completely not wiped out, but every time the Korean army stood and fought against the Japanese, they were wiped out. And so much of the Korean army was destroyed. And what was left was all far to the north of Korea, with the Korean emperor, who had managed to escape. But he had retreated as far as he could go and still be in Korea. He was right on the Korean side of the Yalu River, which is the border between Korea and China. But the Japanese found that even though they had seized all of the fortified cities and other forts and other places, other strongholds of the Korean army, that they couldn't freely go outside of those walled cities and those walled fortifications, because when they did, they were ambushed, attacked by bands of guerrilla fighters. And one of the most famous and most effective of these bands of guerrilla fighters was composed of Buddhists who were fighting under the leadership of Zen master Hyujeong, also known to history as Seosan Daesa. Yeah. So Zen master Sahn, coming back to the present, more or less, or the more recent past, Zen master Sahn sometimes referred to this expression, head of a dragon, tail of a snake, when he was teaching. It's very easy and common and a good thing for Zen students to be very enthusiastic and to set goals for themselves, or to to have some energy, have some to have the head of a dragon in their practice. Anytime we feel a little bit encouraged in our practice, and sometimes this encouragement comes in the form of some awakening experience that we might have while we're meditating, or just in the course of our daily lives. And we all have these realizations, awakenings, enlightenment experiences, openings, whatever you want to call them. But in fact, all of us, each one of us here, has already had the biggest and most important awakening that we will have in our lifetime. And that was whatever got us here this morning, or whatever it was that got us on the Dharma path to begin with. That's the most important thing. And that is the head of a dragon. And many, many people start out on some kind of Dharma path. It doesn't have to be Zen. Doesn't have to be Buddhism. But many people have this head of a dragon. Not everyone. Not everyone does this. Everyone has Buddha nature. Everyone has the potential to become a Buddha. Everyone has the potential, therefore, to take up the path to Buddhahood, which is what Zen is, which is what Mahayana Buddhism is. But even though we all have that potential, not everyone sets out on that path, at least not in this lifetime. And those who do so because of some realization that they've had, some realization that has caused them to turn toward the Dharma. And there's no bigger awakening than that. But having the head of a dragon is only the start. Samsara is a lot like those pesky Koreans. Samsara never gives up. Not to make this talk too militarily focused, but as a general rule, wars end when one side gives up. If you have a war and the two sides reach some sort of negotiated settlement, it means that they're just going to return to their corners and start planning the next war. And that's what happened in the invasion of Korea in 1592. It took many years. After the first year of their almost unchallenged successes on the battlefield, a lot of things went wrong. A lot of things went right. Everything went the Japanese way in the year of the dragon. But in the following year, the year of the snake, a lot of things went wrong. But it took another 5 or 6 years before the Japanese left, and before they gave up. And there's really 3 different versions of how the war ended, depending upon who you are. The Chinese say that the war ended because they got into the war. That was another thing the Japanese weren't counting on, was that the Chinese actually responded very quickly and were able to send. The Chinese knew that the Japanese had intended to invade China next. And so they preferred to fight the Japanese in Korea rather than waiting to fight them in China. And so they provided very effective assistance to the Koreans. And so the Chinese version is that the Japanese gave up because the Chinese got into the fight in a big way. The Korean version is that the Japanese gave up because of the resistance of the Korean people. And the Japanese version is that the Japanese gave up because they decided that the invasion was a bad idea after all. And so they said, nah, this was not a good idea. Conquer all of Asia? Yeah. So, so they did give up. So whatever side you feel like you're on, even if you don't have the head of the dragon, if you are on the receiving end of the head of the dragon, this same saying is very important, to not give up, to keep going. So that the head of a dragon, tail of a snake, it's usually in English, people just say strong start, weak finish. But really it's a strong start that isn't carried through, not carrying through. And so if in fact each one of us already has the head of a dragon, already has this big realization, whatever it was. And usually we have difficulty articulating, explaining how we got here on the Dharma path. Whatever you call it. I practice meditation, I practice Zen, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a seeker. However you characterize the reason why you came here this morning, or the reason why I'm recording this talk, so you might be watching this as a recording. If you have a spiritual practice, as we say in the West, spiritual practice, kind of a nice, covers all the bases and doesn't leave anybody out, really, whatever it is. But let's say more specifically that you're a Zen student in some serious way. What does that mean? Zen student in a serious way means that you practice meditation on a regular basis, daily, maybe twice a day. That you have a sangha, a group of people that you practice with, that you have some connection with, and that you have a teacher who's a real live flesh and blood representative of the Zen tradition. And that means that they had a teacher who was a real live flesh and blood representative of the Zen tradition, and on going on and on. So Zen is often referred to as the mind-to-mind transmission, but I've also heard it referred to as the tradition that is passed along warm hand to warm hand, which I think really better expresses it. But having had that awakening, whatever it was that brought us to the point of being Zen students, the body of the dragon is to keep going. Which is actually so. There are 6 paramitas, 6 virtues, 6 sometimes they're called perfections of Buddhism, which are generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. And of these, one that is really centrally important in Zen is the 4th one, diligence. And diligence, it doesn't sound very sexy. Doesn't sound like Kensho or Satori or awakening, or diligence just means keeping at it. So every day when we practice, perhaps every day when we wake up in the morning and we come here to a 7 o'clock Zoom meeting, 7 o'clock if you're on the East Coast. But whatever it is that you do in your daily practice, every time you do that, that is both the head of a dragon and the body of the dragon, the head of a dragon and the body of the dragon, because it is our diligence, our keeping at it. One of the ways that Zen Master Seung used this saying sometimes was if a student would come to him who had some awakening, some genuine realization, which happens, people who practice Zen, and it depends on the tradition you're in. Some traditions place very little importance on having any kind of Kensho or Satori or breakthroughs. I think I read somewhere where Shunryu Suzuki Roshi was once asked in an interview about the fact that other Zen teachers in the West make a big deal about having kensho and breakthroughs, but he doesn't talk about that so much in his teaching. And in this particular interview, his wife was sitting there in the same room, and she laughed. And she said, that's because he's never had any. But students do have, we all have realizations or whatever, and it's common in the Zen tradition. You get some sort of breakthrough, and you want to go and tell your teacher about it. And a good teacher can tell the difference between, well, maybe they can tell the difference. But one of the things that Zen Master Seung would do to test students was to say something like, well, that's maybe 80% or 90%, kind of throw them back. And to test how certain a student is, to test whether they have the body of a dragon or the tail of a snake. Because if you have the body of a dragon, then you don't need anyone's approval. You don't need a Zen master's approval. Because you've seen something, which is what Kensho means. It doesn't mean see something. It means Ken is see, Sho is nature, as in Buddha nature. If you've had Kensho, then you've seen something and you know that you've seen it. It can't be unseen. If somebody says, "No, I don't think you saw it," if you just catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of your eye, that's better than nothing. But it's fairly easy to be convinced that you didn't really see it. Yeah, so I think sometimes people like to quote Woody Allen and say 90% of practice is just showing up. Which is true. But Woody Allen originally said that about a job. 90% of any job is just showing up. The thing about that, though, is, and this is true also for our practice, if you have a job, it means you have to show up every day. Day after day, week after week, year after year. That's the showing up that we also need in our practice. That's how we have every day. If you wake up with the intention to practice to save all beings, and if you actually do it, if you actually practice, as we are all doing right now, sitting here, then you have the head of a dragon and the body of a dragon. And so the last thing I'll end with just saying that Zen Master Seung said, if you want to do something, but you don't do it, that's head of a dragon, tail of a snake. So the wanting, the desire, the urge, the direction, the aspiration is wonderful, extremely important. Getting up in the morning, doing bows or sitting, whatever, practice is often not particularly wonderful or exhilarating, and certainly not often very entertaining. But that's how we have the body of a dragon. If you want to do something but you don't do it, then you have the head of a dragon and the tail of a snake. So all of us here have the head of a dragon, the body of a dragon today. And I know for me, I never know from one day to the next how it's going to go. But I hope that we all persevere, have diligence, and practice together, and save all beings. Thank you for listening.